So I had the theory that the villain has the highest DPS out of the currently available faction carriers. Now, a lot of you guys have told me that the Vazago has the highest DPS because it has the higher skill per level bonus on the lightweight drones. So today, I will be comparing the DPS between the two ships, and I will show you the stats of both the villain and of the Vazago, because it actually turns out that the Vazago has higher DPS. But first, let's quickly go and take a look at the ship stats. Now, I would like to compare the trade descriptions of both of the ships that I was talking about. So for that, I have to go to the tech tree, which is over here. Let me find Serpentis Corporation, capital ships, carrier, add to comparison, and now let me quickly go to the Angel Cartel, which is over here, and there is their carrier, add to comparison, and let's take a look at the ship stats. Now the roll bonus on both of these ships is going to be the same. That's a universal thing for all of the faction carriers, which is okay. Now the lightweight ship bonus, and yes, the Vazago has plus 10% on both ship turret and ship rocket, while the villain has 7.5% on rocket damage. So yes, if you're combining both missiles and turrets, then the Vazago will in fact have higher DPS, which is very interesting. Now here we see that the stats do differ. The Vazago has a bonus on flight velocity for the lightweight ships, while over here you get web decrease and lightweight ship flight velocity and extra armor. Now the Vazago can be both a shield or armor tank, while the villain is a armor tank. And the villain actually has a better damage transfer ratio, plus 10%, while the Vazago has plus 75%. And over here we will see the classic faction stats. The Vazago will be fast, and the villain will have excellent webs and long range points. Overall, honestly, a very interesting difference between these two ships. Now, of course, I also noticed the difference in the DPS. The Vazago has about 7.1 thousand, while the villain has 6.8 thousand, and this is basically with the exact same build. I have dual webs and the special carry module, and of course, this will be a armor tank, triple adaptives, one reactive, one damage control, one capacitor battery, and 2 armor repairs. I honestly really do like this setup because it works so well. As for the rigs, I have dual burst radiators and one firepower booster, basically the same rigs that I had on the Vazago, and the same engineering rigs. Now here, I will play around with the hangar modification rigs. And first I will go with the normal one that I usually use, and then I will go with the high tier one. Basically, I would like to show you the difference in the different layouts that you can have. Now, here I want to check out the DPS with this one. I will get basically +1 destroyer slot. Now, the best combination for DPS seems to be a lot of bombers plus 1 destroyer. Now, there is that one hangar modification unit that is giving you 4 destroyers. So later on, I will check out that setup, and I'm very curious to know what's the ending DPS going to be like. Is it going to be better than the DPS with bombers? Because the stars have good tracking, and they can apply the damage really well to small targets, while the bombers are excellent at dismantling big ships, but the damage might suffer a little bit against the smaller targets. So in the end, it really depends on what type of carrier you would like to build. And with this current setup, 4.6 thousand DPS, which is honestly significantly lower than the previous layout that I had. So let me quickly return all of the ships in the bay, and let me show you the hangar modification unit that I was talking about. So, they're located in the engineering rigs all the way down. Hangar modification systems or units, both are basically the same. So, you have a lot of them, and all of them are available, but the manufacturing process to get them can be kind of tricky, so you can expect them to be very expensive. Now, the high tier ones cost a lot, and they give you a lot of destroyers. So, in the end, the question is, do you get better DPS with the destroyers, or do you get already good DPS with the currently available cheaper modification systems? That is the question that I'm very curious about, because if you end up getting better DPS with the cheaper hangar systems, then what would be the point in wasting 80 billion ISK or 100 billion ISK for all of the expensive ones? So I'll return this one. That will give me one extra frigate slot, and I will quickly return all of the previously equipped ships, one destroyer squad, and let's not use interceptors. Interceptors are good for PvP, but if you are running encounters, then you would like to have maximum possible DPS, so the bombers are the way to go for best DPS, especially in null where you have a lot of big ships. The bombers will eat them for breakfast. However, always carry a squad of smaller ships, of interceptors, just in case, a sneaky blue tackle decides to make you a target, so that you kill the blue tackle, or, there's a blue around, and if there's a blue ship around, kill it. Don't let anyone close to your faction carrier, unless they are your corp mates that you trust. Well, 6,800 DPS, that's basically the same number that I had before, and now let me go to the drone bombs, or bombard tactic. I just call this implant drone bombs because that's what they are. And I'll just quickly adjust the units for armor tanking. The other units can basically stay the same. If you like to use Nosferatus or neutralizers, I guess that is going to help, but against sub-capital ships, the capital Nosferatus and neutralizers will not work, so basically any other unit that you might think will be useful, you can equip it, and you can also use the thermal circulation on this ship for extra tank, although this implant works if you are... it works with both the DPS and tank build, but in order to maximize the effectiveness of this implant, I really recommend that you use this implant if you have a full-on tank build, because after all, these ships are meant to be tanky, and the tank is in most cases the way to go. And let's see the tank, pretty good stats even for a DPS ship, and let's undock and let's check out the active stats that you can get on the villain. Now, I have to admit, the design of this ship is pretty good. I did fly it before, and now since I fly it again, I have to say that they did a very good job at designing these things. They are really gorgeous looking ships, and I like good looking ships, so yeah. Okay, well, surprisingly, the game did not mess up my module layout that much, so I can basically keep the current layout as it is, because it already looks nice. Let's orbit, and it'll be time to check out the active tank of the ship. Now, my apologies for making some screenshots. It's very rare that I have such a good view on the ship, so while I record this, I usually try to make a thumbnail while recording, so yeah. Sometimes it's very difficult to come up with a thumbnail, so I try to take good looking pictures any chance I get. The thumbnail might sometimes be the most difficult part about creating a video. Okay, now let's go to the build. 6,800 DPS, 4.1 million hit points, 87, 83, 83 and 76%. A little hole on explosive, but that is to be expected with a build like this. Now the carrier damage modification, the special carrier module is active. Now the carrier module does give you DPS. Now it's 8.4 thousand, and it also gives you a lot more tank. Again, these things are really tanky, and the tank is basically, in most cases, the way to go. You can actually combine both the DPS and tank rigs easily. 15.5 million hit points, 97, 96, 96 and 94% resistance on the armor, and I almost have 700,000 hit points, which is a lot of armor, and yeah, this is a lot of tank. These ships can withstand a dreadnought shooting at them for quite a while. However, they don't have the DPS to deal with a dreadnought, so the dreadnoughts are basically the ships that counter the faction carriers. Now later on, I would like to talk about the super carriers, because a lot of you guys have questions about those as well. How will they affect the faction carriers? That's a good question and a very interesting topic that I will cover today. And of course, when I go to the bombs, the tank will significantly go down. I lose the 20% armor resistance, and with that, I also lose a lot of hit points. However, I will gain a lot of DPS. And if you like to run nullsec anomalies, then you want to have a lot of DPS. Now, the thing about the faction carriers is the fact that you get decent DPS, although the Imperial carriers have higher DPS because they can equip the damage mods. But with the faction carriers, you still have decent DPS, and you get tank. Now, the problem with the Imperial carriers that are built for DPS is the fact that they are very squishy. It's very easy to kill them, and very easy to lose them. With these things, it's not as simple to lose a faction carrier, because by default they are already ridiculously tanky, so you can just add up the tank from that point on. And well, the current tank is a little bit lower because this time I'm actually using the drone bombs, and I sacrificed about 2.5 million hit points in order to gain about 3 times more DPS. Now unfortunately, again, as I mentioned before, when you click on the drone bombs, you don't really see the DPS on paper when you look at overview, but the DPS is there. Now, since I have the remote reload, the DPS increase is 150%, so I have about, let's say, 24,000 DPS currently with the bombs active, which is, pretty good. It basically is very similar to the barrage implant in terms of the burst and alpha damage that it can do. I guess more on the burst side, not alpha side, because the barrage doesn't really increase your damage, but it increases your rate of fire, while the bombs are kind of, in a very similar way, also burst weapons, but at the same time they do give you a lot of alpha, so they're also quite similar, but at the same time quite different. And of course, don't forget, you can't warp with the sensor mode, you can't warp with the special carrier module active, so you have to turn that off. And I can see a lot of carrier pilots accidentally forgetting to turn those modules off, and I can see them losing their ship that way. So always have the damage mod, the carrier defense module, and the sensor mode on the first page, so that you can see if they're active or if they're not active. Because if they are active, you can't warp, and if you can't warp, well, there's a big chance that you might be in trouble. So make sure that you don't forget to turn the modules off when you have to warp. Well then, let's yeet some ships. Now, at the first part here, I will use the current rig setup, and I will use the current lightweight ship setup, but later on I will go and swap the hangar module into the high tier one, basically the one that costs 64 billion, or the real price would be what I have been told, about 150 billion, which, yeah, is a little bit on the pricey side, to say the least. So the question would be, is it worth to go and buy the high tier hangar mods over the cheap ones, and we will find that out today. Now, I did say that I'll talk about super carriers and their difference, and a lot of players are worried that they will make the faction carriers and the ordinary carriers pointless. Now, the thing about super capitals is they're not really ships made for a single player to basically own them. They are mostly ships that the alliance or corporation or coalition owns, and most of these ships are being used for large-scale combat. Now, of course, we know how E works, and you can bet that you will have players use these ships for their own purpose. However, it's not as easy as it looks. They are going to be much more massive. They'll probably have much more tank. I expect them to have a little bit more DPS. However, you are probably not going to be able to dock that thing in a normal station. You might ask yourself, well, why is that the case? Well, the super capitals are monsters. They are huge. They're basically as big as a station in some cases, so you can't really fit that thing inside of a normal station. You really need one of the big stations, and the big stations are player built stations, and they can be destroyed and conquered. So you really do not want to be in a, let's say, coalition or alliance that's losing territory and that's losing stations, because if you lose your station where your ship is parked, and if you have nowhere to park it, you will basically be stranded in space, because that thing cannot fit in a normal station, and yeah, you will basically be forced to log in space. And I remember the story of one of the first capital ships that one of the first super capitals that have been destroyed. They have logged out in space, they got scanned, and you guessed it, they got yeeted. So there is a big chance that the first super capital in this game will face the same fate. I'm fairly sure that there will be titans and super carriers just AFK traveling, and they lose capacitor mid-warp, and well, you know what will happen next when they lose capacitor mid-warp. They get scanned, they get tackled, they get yeeted. So, well, on paper, it looks like there will be a big issue. I don't really think so, because with the super capitals, it's not as simple as with the normal capitals, because you can't really park those things wherever you like. You have to have a special station for them, and if you don't have a special station, you can't park them, and if you can't park them, you have to log out in space, and that is something that I would not recommend, because who knows, there's a chance that you might log out in one of my systems, and if I see a logged out super carrier, oh man, I'm throwing everything I have on that thing. So yeah, don't log out a super capital in space. Which means if you don't have a station where you can park them, don't go and buy these ships, because you basically don't have where to store that thing. And that's the thing with the super capitals, and the thing that will be tricky with them, and that's one of the things that will probably prevent a lot of players from flying them. Not because they're bad ships, but because having them and owning them is going to be something quite serious. And yeah, I would say in my case, I don't plan to have a super capital. I will probably test one out, like I test these ships out just to see what they can do. I'll probably yeet one at gate guns just for the lols and just to enjoy the fireworks, but I probably will not fly one. After all, I have nowhere to park it, so the faction dreadnought is basically the next and probably the only goal for a capital ship in my case. After all, I am a cruiser pilot, I like my cruisers, and I mostly do fly cruisers as well as battleships and other ships that I enjoy flying. Now back to the villain. I'm slowly preparing myself to go and swap the hangar modification unit, and we will find out what's the difference between a 5 billion rig and a 85 billion rig. Now I know that with I already mentioned it, with the destroyers you get a lot more tracking, but with the bombers you get a lot more DPS. That's basically what I noticed while flying these ships. Now I'm fairly sure that most of the lightweight ships have different stats, so if you are using, let's say, Minotaur ships, then your DPS might be different. If you're using Caldari lightweight ships, then also your DPS might be different. So I believe that might affect the ending result as well, but there's also the chance that all of them have about the same DPS, just different favorable damage types, and that means in theory that the DPS will mostly be dependent on the ship stats. Now here I forgot to turn off the sensor mode. I was wondering why the hell my ship did not warp, and this is what I'm talking about. Don't forget to turn off the sensor mode when you're warping, because yeah, if I was in trouble here, I would probably be in very big trouble, because I missed the warp out opportunity. Okay, now one thing that the Vazago does a lot better than this ship is the warp speed. The Vazago basically flies through space like a Macario almost, while the other capitals have capital ship warp speeds. Okay, let me remove all the modules. Okay, it will be a pain to assemble this, but yeah, have to do it. And let's equip the higher tier modification units. Now I got 4 destroyer slots. Yeah, -1 medium slots, -2 frigate slots, plus 3 destroyer base. Lovely. So, what is the DPS going to look like? Well, the moment of truth. Is it going to be better or is it going to be worse? Well, I guess there's only one way to find out. Now let me find the Galente destroyers. I like to use the turret ones, because with the turret ones you get better bonus, basically 10% versus 7.5% if you're using missiles, but you can combine if you like. But with destroyers, with turrets, the turret destroyer is the way to go, and well, railguns are the way to go, because this is a Galante ship, and yes, the DPS is actually about 200 DPS lower than with the bombers. Very interesting results, and they do thermal and kinetic damage, classic for the railguns. Well then, this is the most expensive rig in the game at the moment, and with the bombers, well, with the destroyers, you actually have less VPS than with the cheaper ones. At least I think they're cheaper. Might actually be the same price, to be honest, but the price difference is based on the tier difference, and I believe it's a lot more difficult to obtain the higher tier one. So that's what I based the pricing on. But let's see how they work in actual combat. Perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps they're actually pretty good. So, well, already they are doing some pretty good damage, 8.2 thousand VPS, which is a little bit lower than with the bombers and with one destroyer. So, you know, I'm looking at the DPS that they're doing against a battleship, and I feel like the bombers do a bit more damage to the battleship, which is to be, expected. However, I expect the destroyers to do much more damage on the smaller ships. However, at the same time, the bombers did not have much trouble to go through the smaller ships, so it's very difficult for me to say which combination actually works better, because they're roughly, it's hard to say that they're the same, because obviously they're not the same. And at the moment I kind of feel the DPS difference. It really feels like the bomber fleet was eating harder than the destroyer fleet. Now, of course, I would love to hear your opinion on this, because you guys might notice something that I don't notice while recording this. So tell me what you think. Feel free to tell me what you think about the result, and feel free to tell me if I did miss something, because there's always the chance that I accidentally missed something. So if I did miss something, feel free to tell me. Nothing to be ashamed of. If I make a mistake, it happens. I'm a human after all. Humans do make mistakes, and we learn from them, and it's a good thing to accept mistakes and learn from them. And that's basically how you learn Eve in the longer run, of course. With time, we all learn. We all been, we've all been noobs at one point, so it's okay. So, one thing that I really like about this ship are the webs, though. Now, the webs will be very useful if you're using the bomber fleet, because then you can easily apply more damage to the target, because the target will not move a lot. The Serpentis ships get a bonus on web strength, and they get a little bit of web range. Not as long of a range as on the Blood Raiders, but you still get a good long range web on the Serpentis ships. So with bombers, if anything comes close to you, and if they get webbed, they get yeeted, because they will not be able to speed tank the lightweight ships. Now, that also can be said and can work for the destroyer fleet that I currently have. I have about 8 destroyers creeping around the mission. Meanwhile, with the bomber fleet, I have about 12 bombers creeping around, or 9 bombers actually, and 2 destroyers, which is interesting because you actually have more ships on grid if you have frigates. But so far I'm still satisfied with the destroyers over here. They do well. Now I believe the villain might be the hardest to tackle, because if the pilot is paying attention, they will quickly eliminate the tackle ship, and most tackle ships will go for the scrambler range, which means that they will have to go close to the ship. And you have webs. I mean, hopefully you have webs on this ship. After all, would be you will be wasting the skill per level bonus if you don't use the webs. It's basically like not using webs on a Vigilant or Vindicator or a Daredevil. So make sure that you take advantage of every single module that the ship has bonus on. That way you can keep the ship safer. Of course, in the first place, you should not let anyone close to you. Only corp mates. Now there's this Anaconda that has been yeeted, and I've heard that the Anaconda got yeeted with a blue tackle. Basically, everyone turned on the faction carrier, and the carrier turned into a 210 billion kill mail. So yeah, trust only the closest players to you, the closest friends you have in the game. Trust is, trusting someone in Eve is, I believe, one of the highest honors that you can get, because earning trust in Eve is one of the most difficult things that exist in modern gaming. If you trust someone, then yeah, they are definitely going to be trustworthy. If you don't trust someone, they will never earn your trust. And that's basically how this game runs. This is how EVE Online works as well. Basically the same thing applies to both games. trust is the most valuable resource, and being able to trust someone is going to help out a lot in the long run. I've learned that. I mean, I have a lot of experience with other games, and trust in Eve is definitely one of the more unique ones. So, this is wave number 4, I believe. And yes, I definitely feel the difference in clear speed. The villain is clearing this a little bit slower than the Vazago, of course. Not really comparable, because on the Vazago I did not use a full destroyer squad. However, I think the bomber squad would actually clear this much faster. And this is a very interesting result, because I honestly expected it to be the other way around. I expected that the destroyers will do more damage because they would apply more damage, but it seems like the bombers do apply good damage, and it seems like they don't suffer with the damage application, which is interesting. Now, a lot of players have also asked me to try out to use the different damage mods, heat sinks, gyro stabilizers, things like that. I did try that, and it does not work. You really need to have a specialized lightweight chip damage amplifier or something like that in order to increase the damage on the ships. Now, one thing that does affect the DPS on the lightweight ships are small weapon skills, and I believe frigate and destroyer skills as well. So you have to have small ship skills, basically small turrets, small missiles, frigate skills, destroyer skills, in order to maximize the DPS, the hit points, and the overall performance of the lightweight ships. And that is something that I really like, because it makes sense. You are using modified frigates and destroyers as drones, and in order to maximize their performance, you already have to know how they work, which means you have to have skills for them. And I don't really mind that. That's, I guess, one reason to keep the older skills that you have. Something that I did not do on my main account. Basically, I don't have that good of frigate skills. I don't have any destroyer skills at the moment. I have maxed out cruiser skills, I have maxed out battleship skills, almost maxed out battleship skills, and I have pretty decent dreadnought skills. But frigates and destroyers, yeah, that's something that I have to work on. And recently I started the manufacturing skills, so that is something that I am working on as well. And yeah, did not believe that I would be doing industry stuff, but here I am, scaling for industry, just because of that bloody Chemosh that will be probably released at one point. If it doesn't get released, I don't really mind much, because then I have more risk for other ships, which is for me a win-win. But I'm fairly sure we'll get faction dreadnoughts. After all, we got faction carriers, so one day, probably, in half a year or something like that, we might get those faction dreadnoughts, and by then I should be rolling in ISK. I'll try to save my ISK for as much as possible. Doesn't mean that I won't buy anything. I'll definitely be flying new ships that will be released, but the big chunk of my ISK is going to be saved for the Chemosh. Now you might ask yourself, why does a cruiser pilot want a Blood Raider dreadnought? Well, because I just like Blood Raider ships. Simple as that. I like the big boats, I like the faction. I'll fight the faction. Doesn't take more than that.
We're under attack.
Now let's see how... Yeah, this is the last wave, I believe. For a second I got lost in the waves. My apologies. 29 ships have spawned, and yeah, at this moment I'm fairly sure that the frigates do much more damage. That the frigate fleet, the bomber fleet, does much more damage. than
Shield
the
damaged.
than the destroyers. At least that's what I feel is happening here. If I did miss something, please do tell me. I'm all ears for any mistakes that I could have accidentally made along the way. But I feel like I did most things right. I got the DPS rigs. Now, one thing that I would change about the DPS rigs, good that I remember this. Now, currently I have 2 burst and basically one damage amplifier. That one of the rigs applies damage, while 2 of them increase rate of fire. So in the future, when or if we get the lightweight ship damage amplifiers, or well, that's how I call them, but you know what I'm talking about, basically the damage mods for the lightweight ships. For maximum possible DPS with good skills, triple Arators and 2 or 3 of the lightweight drone damage amplifiers, the damage mods, and that should be much better than the current rig setup that I have. I have the current setup to improve the rate of fire and alpha damage because I already don't have any other module to increase the rate of fire or damage, so that way I get decent rate of fire and of course decent alpha damage, which you know is a nice combination, does work really well. I like it. It's good when you have ships that do high alpha. It improves the alpha, it also improves the speed of which the alpha damage will be applied to the target. So this combination does work, but keep in mind that in the future, if you're using this build, then you can easily change the rigs for triple Arators for maximum possible performance with the damage mods. That change is basically valid ever since the last April balance patch, when they changed how some of the modules work, and that combination with triple Arators became the best one. So some of my older builds have the dual burst and 1 collision, but the newer builds for maximum DPS on the ships that have the damage mods have triple Arators. Some of my ships that I fly still have the older setup. It works. I'm just, let's say, a little bit lazy to change the rigs on some of my ships. Some of the rigs are also quite pricey, so that's also one thing. And another thing, for maximum possible DPS, don't use rig integrations. Now, I use integrations basically to combine multiple effects into one rig, because sometimes I like to have the best of everything. Of course, the DPS is not going to be the same, not going to be as good as the DPS with the triple Arators or dual Arators and 1 collision, but you can combine range, you can combine the effective hit points of the lightweight ships, you can improve their speed, and you can improve a lot of things, which in some cases is actually a lot better than having raw DPS. In some cases, you need the extra speed to catch a fast ship. In some cases, you would need the extra hit points for survivability. Everything has basically its own place, and all that does impact on how the ship works. After all, in the end, you are building a ship, and you will build a ship according to what you need. If you need maximum possible DPS, you go with a build like this. If you want to combine multiple effects into one, then you can easily go with rig integrations. Surprisingly, the current rigs are actually cheap. The current lightweight ship rigs are very cheap, like 500 million, so integrating them is actually pretty inexpensive. Now, again, don't get me wrong, it's still expensive, just not as expensive as some of the other integrations that I've done in the past. It's still going to cost a lot, the things are still expensive, but some of the previous integrations that I did, including the integrations on my Revelation, were quite pricey, because some of the rigs were like 1.5 billion for one rig, and let's say I combined like 20, so you can imagine how much risk went into those integrations. While with these things, one rig costs 500 million, so you combine like 3 of them, it's like 1.5 billion. So yeah, I think you see where I'm going with this. It's definitely expensive, but cheaper than the usual integrations for the usual capital ships, which is kind of ironic, because these monsters still cost a lot, and I've been I have heard like that some players got them for like 50 billion, which is possible. I mean, if you have a good corporation, I'm fairly sure they will sell you the chip for cheap, which is okay. That's definitely a good corporation. Sounds like a good corporation to me. Definitely better than having a corporation rob you from 150 billion for one of these ships. So if you can get them for cheap, get them for cheap. Definitely going to be fun to fly. And of course, I always like to say this, they're unique ships, and the uniqueness by itself is basically enough to make it entertaining and interesting. Of course, that can be applied to any special ship, including the long-awaited Tier 2 ships from EVE Online, or the faction frigates, Imperial faction frigates, things like that. So there's a lot of things that should come out pretty soon. Not really sure again what I'm free to talk about, because I'm fairly sure there is some of the things are probably under the non-disclosure agreement. So yeah, I'll just keep it at that. So you know me, I would like to say everything sometimes, but in this case, if I do, I'll be in trouble. So let's just wait for the right moment. So how did the good old, well, not quite old, these things are new, how did the Vazago perform? So based on what I've seen here, the bomber fleet actually worked better than the destroyer fleet. At least that's for the big ships. I'm fairly sure that the stars are better if you have to deal with smaller ships, but in nullsec you will be fighting a lot of big ships as well as small ships. So turns out the cheaper hangar modification does a better job in terms of DPS than the more expensive one. I honestly thought that it's going to be the other way around. I honestly thought that this hangar modification will simply yeet anything, but it's not always the case, isn't it? There's always a surprise lurking at every corner, and at the moment, if you're debating what type of modification to get for your carrier, I would personally go with the cheaper ones. That gives you +1 frigate, and if you are going for good DPS, then 3 bombers and 1 destroyer. Haven't seen, I think there is one that gives me extra frigates, so that's one of the hangar modifications that I have to check out, because if that's the case, then I can add 2 more bombers and probably increase my DPS even more. However, I kind of like to have that 1 destroyer just in case if there is something that the bombers can handle. So I guess in the end you have a lot of different ways how to build these ships, and honestly I really like that. So with that being said, hope that you enjoyed this little run with the villain, one of the most evil looking ships in the game, and I love the fact that this thing looks so evil. If you would like to support me, then feel free to like and subscribe, it helps out a lot. And with that being said, stay safe, fly safe, and as always, I'll see you next time.